Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And we are here to talk to you today in a recap about UFC 238, which we babbled and gawped over and just told you over and over again that it was just the best card we'd had in ages. And, well, Phil, it sucked, didn't it? It was, Valentina Shevchenko won, so there's that.
I think even you, the most ardent Valentina Shevchenko hater on the planet, have to admit that was kind of cool.
Yeah, you know how she was lighting Jessica Ai up, and she was like clearly the way better striker and a better athlete, and then she just like wrestled her and held her down for a bit? That was awesome. I love that when she has a clear advantage in one area of the fight, she refuses to press it. Unless she's doing all the things she does in every fight.
And if GSP or Jose Aldo did this, you'd be like,
"You're
wow,
right."
Look at how.
But they're not weird. They don't do a weird glassy-eyed dance after they win. You know, like they have human souls in their bodies. There's something about Valentina Shevchenko, Phil. There's something about her. I don't know. Makes me uncomfortable. Okay, but we'll talk about that. It was fun to have written an article that was basically the crux of it was breaking down her skills while accusing her of being boring and uninteresting. Then to have all of MMA's horniest fans come after me on Twitter after she won. So we'll talk about that. We will talk about Cejudo Moraes, the main event. We're going to talk about Tony Ferguson versus Donald Cerrone. Again, we're reminding you as we just cover these names why this card was so hotly anticipated. Peter Yan versus Jimmy Rivera, if we have time for more after that. We also want to talk about basically everything we previewed. Suarez Ansarov, Sterling Munoz, plus Grasso Kovalkiewicz, which we did not get to previewing, and Kader Lamas. This card was just riddled with big, meaningful fights, and also, in retrospect, with some really strong, exciting performances. So, yeah, not really anything to complain about here. I had a hell of a good time watching this.
Yeah, it was amazing on paper, and it really lived up to the hype. We got almost every kind of performance. We got, even the bad fights we got were candidates for the MMA Depressed Us. We got one real boring one, and we got one incredibly sloppy heavyweight jiggle fest.
Mm-hmm. Really everything you want, you know?
Yeah. We got knockouts, wars. Amazing.
Would you go to the greatest buffet in the world and only eat dessert, Phil? Jiggly heavyweight fights are our, wilted greens.
Yep.
Delicious. Good for you. Nutritious.
Need them to make everyone else look better.
Yeah, basically. Blago Ivanov is a big-ass piece of parsley on my plate. But doesn't mean I didn't eat it. All right. So, yeah, why don't we jump in with the main event, shall we? Henry Cejudo, Marlon Moraes. Before we even get into breaking it down, Phil, you had just a golden tweet, I thought, regarding this fight that I would like to now read out for our audience, if you will allow me to do the honors. The best thing about Henry Cejudo's increasingly unquestionable greatness is that it completely removes any lingering pretenses that MMA is a badass cool sport for badass cool people, rather than being a sport for very silly people who are coincidentally good at violence. Yeah, that's about it. Enjoy the Henry Cejudo era, people, because it's here to stay. It turns out he's really fucking good. I'm still kind of shocked that he beat Marlon Moraes the way he did. What do you think?
Yeah, he is increasingly gaining a claim towards being the pound-for-pound number one in the sport. Mm-hmm. And when you consider the greatest combat sports athletes of all time, he has to be in the discussion, Connor.
Does he? Does he really?
He has to be in the discussion.
I don't want to have a discussion about it.
I'm sure there's some other guys in some other combat sports which may be marginally more developed than MMA. But I don't think any of them have done anything like win an Olympic medal and win belts and stuff. That just seems like it would be weird. Like, I'm pretty sure he's the best.
You know what? You're winning me over.
Yeah. Who else is that? I mean, there's Floyd Mayweather, but he only really beat Manny Pacquiao.
Yeah.
He's the best boxer. There's a bunch of old guys. There's I was like Roberto Greb, and
God, I hope Kyle MacLachlan is listening to this.
You know, I know my boxers pretty well. Benny Ray Leonardson,
one of my favorites.
He was one of the Five Kings. He actually fought Roberto Greb, I believe. Yeah. So, but you know, I wouldn't imagine any of them are on Henry Cejudo's level.
Well, now Cejudo has beaten one of the greatest boxers of all time, Archie Moore-Ice. I don't know. I don't know, Phil. It's the Henry Cejudo era. I don't know. My brain isn't working the way it used to. Things are different now. Okay. Well, what's always fun is, and this is great, by the way, we have this episode where there is no UFC event coming up next weekend. We have a weekend off, a blessed weekend off, which means we will be doing an MMA Depressed Us this week for Bloody Elbow. But more importantly, it means we get to kind of stretch our legs and just have fun talking about these fights. I'm always, when I have been proven wrong, thinking of fights through the lens of, did I see them correctly? What dynamics about this matchup really surprised me? Truth be told, almost from the get-go, it looked like the fight I had predicted. That I think both of us more or less predicted. It looked like Henry Cejudo sort of being caught out at kicking range without a particularly nuanced idea of how to get out of that range, and just being chewed up by a much better kicker. And what really showed was something else that we mentioned was Marlon Moraes' speed, his hand speed, the speed of his kicks. That was giving Henry Cejudo tons of trouble, and his lack of subtle and systematic defense was really not helping there. The other thing that we talked about, though, was Cejudo's ability to, as you put it, Phil, tank unbelievable amounts of damage, to just soak it up, somehow gain power from it, and then steam forward all the harder. And the question was, like, well, is that enough to just be totally outclassed at kicking range? And it kind of was. It kind of was. Although you have to give some credit to Henry Cejudo for some of his boxing entries. Like, he was in such a rough position with both of his legs being just chopped out from under him, starting to get kicked in the head. What did you think about his adjustments? Anything in particular stand out to you?
So, I mean, at the beginning, this didn't just look like the fight. I mean, from my perspective, I don't think it didn't look like the fight that I necessarily expected, just because it was like that, but I never expected it to be to that extent.
Right.
I was not expecting Cejudo to look completely impotent for the first round. And honestly, I felt like, even watching it at the time, I just felt like that was a game planning error. Because I think we mentioned that, it would be a much better idea for Cejudo to just pressure and stay in Marlon Moraes' face. And I mean, that's not exactly rocket science. You don't fight kickers out at range, particularly not when they are notorious leg kickers and you have an incredibly long stance that leaves your front leg out there.
Yeah.
I spent the entire first round just thinking, what is he doing? Is he trying to prove a point? And I mean, admittedly, afterwards he said that they wanted to wait until Marlon Moraes gasped, but even then, it just seemed like a terrible strategic choice at the time, and honestly, in retrospect, because you don't give a guy like Marlon Moraes time to chew you up.
Yeah.
Especially not because, even if you have confidence in your chin, he may just, by the time he's quote-unquote gassed out, he may have just taken your legs out from under you completely.
Marlon was well on his way to gassing when he almost knocked Henry silly at the very end of the second round. No chin is invincible. We know that to be true. Yeah.
And, you just don't... And it was the fact that, if it was a plan to gas Moraes out, it was almost entirely a Homer Simpson one because he barely hit him in the first round.
Yep.
It would have been just a boxcar Homer performance, but I mean, so I think that I can't believe that was anything but a bad approach. But the shocking thing was how quickly he was able to turn it around.
Mm-hmm. Can I say, oh, please.
No, keep going.
Well, I think, I kind of hesitate to buy that their plan was merely just to get chewed up until Moraes got tired. Cause, historically, like, that hasn't really happened to Marlon Moraes. Like, it is notable, I guess, looking at his record. A lot of his wins are first round finishes, but he's gone 5 before. He's fought at pace for 3 rounds plenty of times.
Has he?
Well, at pace is a question. Yeah,
that was something I was really thinking about after this.
The last 2 decisions.
Everyone he's fought recently, everyone at a high level. Does anyone fight at any kind of pace?
Yeah, because the last 2 decisions were to John Dodson and Rafael Assunção. I had that thought as well, but there's also a third round submission win over Shema Moraes in 2015. You think that was an easy pace in that fight? Hell no. I don't think of
Shema Moraes as being a particularly high-paced fighter.
Well,
I think he's very dangerous.
Yeah,
but he's like I think of him as being basically a worse version of Marlon in many ways.
Yeah, fair enough. So that's something. But either way, even if that was the thought process, and maybe that was just a really good read on Marlon Moraes as an opponent. It looked to me like Henry was trying to deal with those kicks early and couldn't. He did try to come in with some really big, hard counter combinations. The moment, after the first few kicks landed, it looked to me like his plan was to counter those kicks with combinations. And probably to press forward. I don't know. I thought maybe he was just burning a minute, just sort of moving around like lots of fighters do to get a feel for it, to get some of Marlon's timing before he started exchanging with him. It looked like his plan was to exchange with him, whenever he let a kick go. And Moraes was just too fast. Moraes was throwing these really quick combinations, just sort of beating Henry out in the pocket. And also, his footwork and his defense were showing as well. Moraes is, by most metrics, a far more technical kickboxer than Henry Cejudo. And in those early exchanges, he would land a kick, Henry would plant his feet, and Moraes was already moving around him, tagging him with these quick little combo counters. So I thought Cejudo basically got convinced to stay at range and eat the kicks because he had a really hard time. He got put back on his heels and hit with a few clean shots when he was trying to counter them at first. He never got the timing on those shots. But even so, it doesn't seem like intense pressure was a part of his game plan, and that is confusing because that is how he won this fight, is when he just stayed in Marlon Moraes' face as much as he could and didn't let him get away with a single action without responding.
Yeah, I think once he was just you know what, I am literally not going to let this guy out of punching range, whatever it takes. If he hits me, whatever, I'm just going to stay on him. Then that was really when it turned around. And it turned around shockingly quickly once he did that. Mm-hmm. And partially it was just that I think they're broadly similar punches in that kind of regard. They're broadly fairly similar in that regard, in that they both have, in that they'll just kind of sit down on a flurry of punches to scare the other guy off. Mm-hmm. You could see that happening early on in the fight when they got into exchanges. Cejudo was like, "Do I want to actually trade punches with this guy?" Moraes is still obviously the bigger hitter of the two, but the problem is that Moraes just didn't seem willing to just go after it as much as Cejudo was, frankly.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think he should have not gone after it. He gassed himself out, feeling like he had to respond to every single attack with a full powered combination. It worked great in the first round. It's what scared Henry off, I thought. But after that, each one was a Pyrrhic victory. Each one was exhausting him, and Henry just kept coming. I just think he didn't seem to manage his pace well at all.
I mean, I don't really know what his option was, because he also showed that he had no answer for the clinch. So what was he going to do? Was he going to stand his ground, or was he going to? I mean, he either had to stand his ground and end up getting clinched up, or he had to try and move away, or he had to just try and scare Cejudo off.
Well, yeah, he needed to take some power off his shots, I thought, and rely on his footwork. You know, there were moments here where he was very clearly outmaneuvering Cejudo. It's something that he was capable of doing, you know, which is no surprise from a Mark Henry fighter. But at a certain point,
I don't know. I think it's. Mm-hmm. I think it's very hard to run away from, not necessarily run away, but to play a pure, Jose Aldo style pivot and counter game on someone who is really just coming after you. That is all they want to do.
Well, yeah.
And they just want to crash the pocket. They're just going to throw combinations, crash the pocket, and clinch.
Because at some point you need to be able to stop or plant your feet. But even so, Moraes could have done that with those exchanges. He was still landing with his big counter combinations when he dug his feet in. He needed to parse those out. He needed to spend more time not wasting energy, just creating angles, trying to create space. And then when Cejudo really bore down on him, that's when you decide it's a good time to burn some energy and rip off some hard shots. You know, it's something. It's something other than just every single time he throws at you, you plant your feet and throw with huge power, which is what Moraes was doing basically by the final minute and a half of this fight. Is he was just sort of waiting for Cejudo to come in and trading every single time, huge power, trying to knock him out. I don't know. That seems like a bad strategy to me, or a bad adjustment from Marlon Moraes.
I mean, by the last minute and a half, Moraes was dead on his feet, because I think he didn't really have much of a chance.
Of the first round or of the fight?
Oh no, but not the first round.
Yeah, that's what I mean. By the end of the first round, he was basically fighting the way he fought for the rest of the fight. But it was a little different before that. It was more, kicks. It was more distance pressure. It was more feints. But it was by the end of the first round that Cejudo had started to back him up. And in the second round, it was just all Cejudo backing him up and Moraes just trying to scare him off. He got fucking Aldo'd. He got Aldo'd, goddammit.
I'm not really sure if that's necessary. I mean, I just feel like Cejudo just decided to bite down, and then he just had he had a major durability, cardio, and clinch offense edge. I mean, the clinch was actually somewhat shocking here. I mean, not necessarily in the ways that I thought it would be. It wasn't the idea that Cejudo was going to just body lock and trip him, although he did do that eventually. It was, I mean, and this kind of speaks to the improvements of Henry Cejudo, right? Is that he lost to Demetrius Johnson in the collar tie, in the not double underhooks, but he lost in an exchange, trying when Demetrius Johnson locked up the double collar tie on him, and in this fight he absolutely fucked Moraes up there. Mm-hmm. He clearly spent a long time learning what to do in that position, telling himself that's not going to fucking happen again, and it's now something that he's he was frighteningly potent there.
Yeah.
I mean, just slamming knees into Moraes over and over again. And Moraes was just like, man, I cannot lock up with this guy.
Yeah, I don't know. I was kind of, again, there are two sides to this for me. I was kind of surprised at how potent, obviously surprised at how potent Cejudo was in the clinch, but also how impotent Marlon was there. I thought he was an okay clinch fighter. He just sort of let Cejudo grab his neck and just tried to block with his arms. I don't know. This seemed like a weirdly, perhaps there's something buried in Marlon's record, like we were suggesting before, like you were suggesting, that Marlon has not been tested in these specific ways, and we just haven't had occasion to think about them, that every time he might have been tested in those ways, he's knocked those people out quickly. But, this seemed like some weirdly bad decisions from such an experienced fighter to me, someone who has held a title and defended it a few times before. And maybe this is best typified by something that may have been mentioned in the cold open already. But when Henry Cejudo did his I'm the king of magic routine at the stare downs You know, he still had that rubber snake in a magician's hat. He had a little bunny, something to do with magic. Marlon Moraes, I don't know. No one's really sure. It was really silly, and everyone was making fun of it online. If you watch that video, the audience is just deadly silent. No one knows how to respond. It's really just awkward. But Marlon Moraes was mad about it. He got really fucking pissed. And I don't know. It didn't seem to me like he was thinking very clearly in this fight. Like, I honestly did expect a little more nuance from Marlon Moraes. I expected him to at least be able to deal with a strategy, which was essentially just don't care about being hit and charge forward. Now, I know that's a difficult thing to deal with. Like, good fighters lose to people like John Lineker and Jessica Andrade for that very reason. But, you know, usually they like try some other things first. And I didn't see that from Marlon Moraes in this fight. I saw him basically going to one response and thinking he could or thinking that his only chance was to just tear Cejudo's head off on the way in. To just hit him with massive counter punches and exchange with him. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there were some tactical things that he did that you know, obviously didn't really like. I felt like he kept circling into Cejudo's power hand once he got hurt. He kept circling into Cejudo's right hand. But in the end, like, I think it just really, like, reiterated to me what a terrifying physical force Cejudo is.
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, and I thought that would be eroded somewhat by being at bantamweight, but he was talking about how he'd been putting on muscle or whatever, but, like, he kind of wasn't kidding. He's still a terrifying physical force.
Yeah.
I mean, he just allowed the most dynamic kicker in the division to just have his way with him for an entire round. And then when he actually turned it up, he just kind of annihilated him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I really liked, by the way, like I do want to give just a little bit of shine before we move on to the things that Henry actually did here. Like, I know he's goofy and silly, and we credit a lot of his success to his physical capabilities. But, like, right from the get-go, he did have to adjust. You know, he was in trouble. That the karate-style Henry was basically taken away from him very quickly into the fight. Because he was just a sitting duck for those kicks, and didn't know how to get away from him. So he had to go to his more of an old-school square stance. He had to do a lot more of what he did to Joe Benavidez back in the day. And you know, like, I thought he did a pretty good job of taking the power off his punches, of initiating the exchanges a little earlier than he wanted to actually land. The first few that got him in trouble, where Marlon's speed was just beating him without issue, was because he was just fully committing to like 4 or 5 big shots. And it was easy to predict for the quicker fighter. Later on, like by the end of the second round, Cejudo was sort of flashing these quick punches, sort of doing a lot of right and left hand jabs, just to give Marlon some business to deal with before he could then come in and land a big hook. You know, he was still getting hit with big counters the entire time, but he could take those counters, and what he wanted at that point was strategically to create the exchanges, to keep creating them as often as he could. The other thing was how he sort of found the clinch from boxing range, too. He very consistently would hit Marlon, and then as Marlon was thinking of countering, especially as he got tired and those counters, Cejudo had an easier and easier time seeing those counters being loaded up. He would just sort of reach out and push Marlon Moraes. You know, he'd hit him with a big shot and then just put both hands on his shoulders or grab his wrists and just shove him backwards. And if Marlon resisted that, that was when Henry would grab him by the back of the neck and hit him with the big knees in the clinch. So I thought, like, yeah, it was kind of a suffocating style of pressure from Henry Cejudo. It did require a lot of toughness, but he did a great job of just slowly taking away all the breathing room Moraes had to think and adjust.
Yeah, I mean, it was like I said, it was strange to see the way Marlon responded to Cejudo's like offense, because especially due to the fact that like Cejudo was very, very right-handed in this fight.
Uh-huh.
A lot of it was like it was a basically either southpaw jab, and he'd just kind of spear into it, or it was just, you know, the old rear straight. And it was a little concerning that Moraes just kind of kept circling into it. But, like, also, as with Woodley previously, we've discredited how active on the ground Henry Cejudo is.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, something that he's clearly improved a lot.
Yep.
Because he fucked Moraes up. And admittedly, Moraes was very badly compromised by that point. But, you know, not only did he beat him up and eventually end up TKOing him on the ground, but, like, that Brabo Anaconda that he went for was sick as hell.
Yeah, it was. And Moraes was, as much as he was exhausted, like, it was just like on the feet. Moraes was fighting back as hard as he could. Cejudo could have approached those positions as just control and wear him out, just make him work and don't do anything. But no, he was, each move Moraes tried an arm bar, Moraes tries a little hip escape, whatever. Cejudo was taking that as an opportunity to hit him, to advance position and continue the attack. So,
it did remind me a little of watching Barboza again. I wouldn't, like, Moraes has been much harder to push into those situations than Barboza.
Oh, yeah.
But it did start looking an awful lot like Barboza.
That's, you know, it's a Mark Henry student problem. Caitlin Chukagian does the same shit.
Just a default to very wide circular movement, and then just swinging. Yeah,
but I think again there were moments in here where I thought Moraes could have approached it differently, and he had periods like he tried. Third round opens up, he comes out, he was already tired, and he's coming out and he tries a little jab. You know, he's moving his feet, he's trying to read the offense coming in, and then like 20 seconds in, he sells out in a huge head kick, swings 2 huge punches. Like, I don't know. It just seemed like he really got sucked into wanting to win the fight that Henry Cejudo was trying to bring to him. That was my perspective watching this. But, Henry Cejudo, greatest fighter of all time. Suck it, folks. Let's take a break. When we come back, we will talk about the second greatest fighter of all time, Jessica Ai, and how she was tragically defeated by Valentina Shevchenko after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Welcome back, one and all, to Heavy Hands. Valentina Shevchenko, Jessica Ai. I will now fall silent for 15 minutes while Phil talks.
I mean, this once again proves that Valentina Shevchenko is the greatest women's martial arts fighter ever.
I know I said it would be quiet, but I must protest. It was.
She has an argument for beating Amanda Nunes, a strong one, and she beat Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Yes, she did. She did.
And she beat Jessica Ai and Priscilla Cachoeira.
Wow.
And she finished them.
Wow. She finished those two women?
Yes.
Who else?
Finish someone else.
Juliana Pena. I.e. the new, somehow angrier Ronda Rousey. Yeah.
So this fight was it was always going to be a slaughter. We tried to find ways for Jessica Ai to win, and there weren't any. I don't think there was any feasible way for her to win this fight at all. I mean, particularly because, Shevchenko just did what you should do with someone when someone is completely outmatched, and she just put away her opponent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she didn't wait for Jessica Ai to really try anything. She didn't give her much of a chance. You know, she wasn't like, oh, this person's worse than me. Let's not take any risks and let's just see what they do.
Mm-hmm. Because
that would have conversely been it probably would have been the riskier approach. Instead, she just booted her in the stomach a bunch of times, took her down. She did work for a submission, Connor.
I know.
And then finished her off with that disgusting head kick.
People were really upset about that. Are people like particularly queasy about seeing women knocked out with head kicks or something? I was kind of surprised. The reaction was really like empathetic, which I get. It's not a bad thing. You know, you just see someone get hit in the head with what is essentially a baseball bat, but you know, happens like every weekend. People were really torn up for. It's also like it's Jessica Ai. You don't have to feel that bad. You know, it's okay. She's gonna blame someone else for why she got hit with that head kick anyway, right?
I think she's gone out on Instagram and she's been pretty like
I'm sure I know.
Complimentary about the whole thing. Her days of threatening to beat up Brent Brookhouse are behind her.
I forgot about that.
Yep. I mean, it was a particularly scary head kick knockout. I mean, with that one and the Jimmy Manuel one, those two are particularly like, wow, are they dead knockouts?
Fair enough. They were both out for a couple minutes. I mean,
yeah,
that the aftermath has something to do with it as well.
Yeah, the ones where they're trying to show you things going on around the cage, and there's a specific dead zone that they're not ever showing you because, you know, there's doctors and people in there trying to, you know, make sure that the person is still alive. And I wasn't
really worried. I wasn't worried until Valentina Shevchenko almost showed a moment of concern, and then I was like, "Uh-oh, something is wrong." Yeah, okay. I mean, it was a frighteningly effective knockout. I mean, really, like set the bit aside. There's nothing really to critique here about Valentina Shevchenko, but you know, it was a fight that she was always going to win. As you said, like we tried to find some avenues into this, but where were the winning phases or distances? What was the winning direction for Jessica Ai? Like, what kind of fight could she have possibly forced on Valentina Shevchenko, or what kind of fight could she have convinced her to have that she would have had a good chance of winning? Was she going to finish her? How? You know, she's going to hit her with like that standing arm triangle that she caught Zoila Frausto with. Like, she's not much of a finishing threat. She's not a particularly not a particularly nuanced striker. Like, in some ways, it seems like Jessica Ai's striking technique has deteriorated since she first came to the UFC. You know, like, she doesn't even really have that nice crisp jab all that often anymore. Now her chin flies up in the air with every punch she throws, and they all tend to get kind of messy and blend together. Her success at 125 compared to the profound lack of success she had for a couple years at 135 is really just that she is now at like physical parity or has a physical advantage over the women she's been fighting. But like, so is Valentina Shevchenko. And by the way, she was strong enough to throw Holly Holm around in the clinch at 135. Holly Holm, who is a featherweight. So what was Jessica Ai going to do here? You know? I don't know. It's hard for me to say much more than that, I guess.
Just that, well, you were mentioning that Holly Holm fight, and now it's probably time for the next number one contender in the most exciting weight class in combat sports to take a step up. If you like people loudly kiaing,
no.
If you like people throwing an even volume of strikes into an approximate sphere of air which surrounds the opponent, then get fucking ready.
No.
For Caitlin Chookagian, the strawweight title challenger. Oh, yeah.
Goodness me. You know what? That might actually be like not interesting to watch, but from
but it will be loud. There will be kios.
No, from a competitiveness perspective, I could actually imagine someone like Caitlin Chookagian being weirdly frustrating for Valentina Shevchenko. She's at the very least a fighter who knows how to not give much to her opponent. Generally, people who have success against her go after her. So, you know.
Shevchenko completely shut Holly Holm out. Caitlin Chookagian is going to have nothing for her.
Yeah. I
mean, Holm dropped her, but like, Chookagian is not going to do that.
My only thought was really that, like, actually, maybe even worse for it. My thought was like, well, I don't think that Chukagian, if given that kind of matchup, is going to do what Holly Holm did, which is basically decide, like, well, if she's not going to bring the fight to me, I have to bring it to her. And so Holm just kept walking into counters over and over, and the more she got countered, the more she wanted to attack without getting countered. You know, the more she redoubled her efforts. I was thinking, like, maybe Chukagian won't do that. But then Chukagian did very notably, like, sit down on punches and come forward against Joanne Calderwood. So she's probably developed just enough that she won't merely throw kicks from long range and give someone like Shevchenko an ugly decision.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's her basic game plan is just like throw punches as a very light artillery barrage at the however many cubic feet of air that they see the opponent in front of them as occupying.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you throw 300 punches into like this particular sphere of space, then surely some of them will connect.
It's a grape shot style of kickboxing technique.
Yep. I mean, I call it leaf blower kickboxing every now and again.
Canister shot Caitlin Chukagian. Leaf blower kickboxing is good. I like that.
It's all that general kind of idea of just being like, duh, stop it. Stop it.
I'm so pissed at my neighbor. They keep getting their sidekicks. They keep blowing their fucking sidekicks onto my driveway. You know?
And it's also very noisy.
And cordless. So anything to say about Shevchenko's performance? I mean,
no, it was very good. Performances at flyweight, in all honesty, have been actually pretty fun. All of them.
Yeah, it's
no
true.
criticisms of any of them. She completely fucked up Priscilla Cachoeira and Jessica Ai, as she should have done.
Uh-huh.
And the Joanna Jędrzejczyk fight was a convincing shutout, and she didn't have almost any rounds where it looked like she was going to lose them due to inactivity or anything like that. Admittedly, that was in part due to Jędrzejczyk being Jędrzejczyk, and constantly coming forward and being a general range pressure kickboxer. But I mean, you really can't front on her strawweight one at the moment. I mean, unfortunately, it's just the fact that there is no one for her to fight in this division. There's no one compelling, and I think the UFC actually really loves that because they have now got bootleg Rousey. They've got someone, they've got a blonde, conventionally attractive woman in a weight class where no one is going to challenge her for the foreseeable future. They can build her up as an unstoppable force, and honestly, it will go down well. If you put her in these kind of situations and she performs like this, it'll be great for them. She'll just put her against horrendously overmatched competition. She can fight, they can build a vengeance for my sister narrative, and they can put Roxanne Modafferi in there with her. And she'll just dunk on these people, and then you can move on to the main event, and that will be her role, and I think they love it.
Don't do that. Don't do that to Roxy. I don't want one of the most personable MMA fighters to lose succinctly to one of the only MMA fighters that I might not describe as a person. I mean, in all honesty, like as you said, there's at the very least, if there were a fighter who were truly worthy of just constant, unending critique for being boring, you would level that critique at them when they face the equivalent, whatever their equivalent of a Jessica Ai or a Priscilla Cachoeira is, and don't finish them. And I can complain that Shevchenko could have just sparked Cachoeira out on the feet, and almost certainly could have done that to Jessica Ai here as well, and that she chose to take both of them down and did most of her damage to Cachoeira on the ground. I can critique that, but you get an opponent of that level relative to you, at the very least, you're supposed to go beat them up. And she did. She did that to Jessica Ai. She did it to Cachoeira. I cannot complain about the Joanna Jędrzejczyk fight beyond the fact that it was my girl losing to my least favorite girl. But, that was also a phenomenal performance. Valentina Shevchenko is clearly and frustratingly extremely good at what she does. Here's an interesting thought I had, and I don't know if I should mention this now or wait till we talk about this one. But potentially the only tough matchup out there on the horizon for Valentina Shevchenko that I can see is Tatiana Suarez, who will probably not be able to stay at 115 all that much longer, at least if her frame is any indication, and who only had problems with Nina Ansaroff this last weekend when Ansaroff managed to push her backwards. But coming forwards, she is by far the most difficult female wrestler in MMA to deal with. And so that interests me, is an opponent that Shevchenko could probably only have a really strong chance of beating if she were able to plant her feet and push her backwards. But retreating and fighting off the counter might really have trouble with.
Yeah. I mean, Shevchenko has physically overpowered some fairly large women.
Sure.
Like, I mean, she is very hard to outmuscle in the clinch.
No doubt.
But, you know, it's worth noting that I don't think Juliana Pena is actually the biggest 135er in the world. And she did just, as far as I remember, she just bum rushed Shevchenko into the fence and actually took her down. So there's certainly some arguments there that Suarez could do something similar. But, you know, I think Suarez at the moment leans very, very heavily on her physicality.
Undoubtedly.
And it would not be the advantage that it is where she is right now. I mean, and we're not talking like she's not. I mean, this isn't a Henry Cejudo situation because she's just not nearly as developed as Henry Cejudo is by this point.
Right.
Henry Cejudo is an elite fighter in multiple areas now, and she is an elite fighter in exactly one. So yeah, I mean, maybe down the line.
Down the road.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's about all we have to say about a 6-minute fight, or a 5.5-minute fight in which Valentina Shevchenko did everything she wanted. Why don't we take?
I think I landed a strike.
Did she?
I think she landed one by the numbers.
Good for you, Jessica. You take that one to the bank. We'll take a break. When we come back, Tony Ferguson, Donald Cerrone, and Peter Yan, Jimmy Rivera, bound and determined to get to both of those at least. Anything listed that we do not cover on this episode will be featured on a bonus episode this week on the Heavy Hands Patreon. And I hope you guys got a chance, by the way, to listen to the bonus episode we put out last week. If you didn't, there may be some value in listening to our previews of these 238 undercard fights, maybe as a companion piece to the recap bonus that'll be coming out shortly. But also our recaps of Gustafson Smith and Rakic Manoa are on there as well as some nice sentiment towards older aging fighters from Phil that is worth listening to. So check that out. And all of that's on the Heavy Hands Patreon. And we'll be back for Ferguson Cerrone after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's go ahead and talk about it. The People's Main Event, a phrase which, by the way, did you know, Phil, Ariel Helwani coined that phrase.
Amazing.
Yeah, he's the first one to say the People's anything. So credit to the big boss. But the People's Main Event of this card was Donald Cerrone versus Tony Ferguson. Two things before we jump in on the analysis. I am delighted to say that Tony Ferguson, for all of the shit he's been going through lately, it was like seeing Max Holloway come back against Brian Ortega. It was like, oh, good. He's still just the same dude. Doesn't look any different. Doesn't look diminished. Looks like he's having fun. He's doing his usual thing. So that was great. The other thing I want to say is that given the, I guess, I don't know, somewhat unusual circumstances. I mean, like Cerrone's eye closed. The fight got stopped. I don't see why that's grounds for a rematch or something unusual. MMA is weird, but like that's a TKO when your eye gets shut by a punch. But given the way it ended, damn all of you if you were among those people who booed Tony Ferguson for some insane reason. Like, was that perplexing to you, Phil? Like,
I was absolutely baffled.
T-Ferg felt like he had to get up there and apologize and shit. I'm like, why is this happening? What is going on? Like, He hit him after the bell. So what? It happened in another fight on this card. You know, like it happens all the time. And it also didn't end the fight. It was Cerrone blowing his nose after having his orbital fractured that ended the fight. So, I don't know. It made me feel bad for Tony. Like, he had such an amazing homecoming, and then it just sort of got shit on by him, you know, finishing Cerrone in a way that people didn't want him to.
Yeah, he looked incredibly upset afterwards.
I know.
Like, he was just like, you know, just talk to Cowboy. And then he was like, yeah, we'll run this back if he wants to. I would never want to do this. It's like, man, come on.
No, you beat him. It's cool, man.
Yeah. It's fine. Like, in general, I am not worried about people doing the punching after the bell thing, like, tremendously. Unless it's really obvious. But this was literally one of those things where the bell goes as he's starting to throw a combination. It's an incredibly loud fight. It is by far the loudest fight of the evening.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of how excited people are for it. I doubt he could hear shit.
Yeah. And it also annoyed me the way Tan Dan scolded him afterwards. Like, no, that was blatant. I told you the fight was over. It's like, Tan Dan, you are 9 feet tall. If you are not getting between the fighters, what the fuck are you here for? Like, that should be your main attribute as a ref, is that you're big enough you don't have to fear anyone smaller than Tai Tuivasa. You should be cramming yourselves between them the moment you hear the horn.
Yeah, my responses to, like, to late stoppages are very binary. If someone, I mean, to not late stoppages, but to someone who keeps going after they're supposed to stop. If it's just the bell or something like that, I don't care. If it's the ref who gets between you after, like, if like a ref jumps on someone when their opponent is tapping, or if a ref tries to separate you and you somehow try and go around the ref, or you keep attacking the submission after the ref has touched you, fuck you, you're a piece of shit.
Right.
Like, that's basically how I feel about it.
Pretty
Other than
simple,
that, it's just defend yourself at all times. They tell it to you at the beginning. Don't assume that because half a second ago the bell rang that a punch isn't coming for your face.
Yeah. You hear the bell, take a few steps back, you know, just get out of range. Safe practice. Put your hands up and take a step back. So, about the fight itself. Again, the late punch from Ferguson was not what decided this fight. So just get that out of your head if you are somehow still holding on to that conception. It was a late punch. It happens. Again, it literally happened in one of the boring fights on this card that we don't want to talk about. And no one cared. What happened is, you know, Cerrone's face got busted up, and that's part of fighting. What did you think of their respective performances? I thought this was actually like a pretty good-looking fight from both guys.
It was a very Donald Cerrone versus Tony Ferguson fight, right?
Yeah.
But it was very, like, it was just more so. More so than I would have expected. Like, once again, we had Ferguson doing his utterly perplexing thing of having terrible defense in the first round and then looking really good in the second.
He's just awkwardly hard to hit, you know?
Yeah, but not in the first round.
No, never.
I mean, afterwards, he's blocking shots, he's rolling them off his shoulders, he gets really good at parrying them. He is exceptionally. It does kind of speak to that idea that you've got to. He might have eyesight issues because he's such a handsy fighter.
Mm-hmm.
He's constantly just kind of manipulating the other guy's strikes out of the way, in a kind of like John Jones, but much better.
Yeah, a lot of his like defenses are the parries, as you said. Jordan Breen was pointing that out, but also like the sort of glance off defenses, like. He'll just sort of punch with you, like lean back, his chin's really high, but he'll just stick a punch up underneath the punch you're throwing, and it just jams it so it doesn't connect with his chin. So yeah, it's a lot of physical contact. It's a lot of reaching out, catching the hands, deflecting them, changing the trajectory of the punch before it can connect. It's very little, I see that punch. I can tell if I move my head back 6 inches, it won't hit me. Tony Ferguson does not have that ability.
Yeah. And we saw how much Cerrone's boxing has improved, but still the dangerous thing about that is that Cerrone has always been, it's always been possible to pull Cerrone into boxing matches. And it's never really a great thing for him unless he's against someone who he has either a major reach advantage over, or he's just a better boxer than.
Mm-hmm.
And because a large amount of their like the first round, which was the one where Cerrone would have had to really take over or take Ferguson out, they were just trading hands.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought in particular, like, Cerrone, like I said, he can just be convinced into boxing matches. And I'm not saying that he should have just been throwing raw kicks, because he just would have gotten knocked out. But it was the fact that, like, he was able to force Ferguson backwards, because Ferguson, as mentioned, is just not, especially in that first round, he was just eating clean strikes with his head up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sort of surprised that Cerrone just never did his thing of just chasing after him with 3 punches and following up with a head kick.
Where were the follow-up kicks?
Yeah. And he sort of tried it a little bit in the second round, but by that point, Ferguson had woken up, and Ferguson was largely just beating the shit out of him, and the initial punches weren't landing anymore. So, yeah, I mean, it was the dynamic, I think, that we expected to see. It was Ferguson being the slow starter, but him also just being a horrendous style matchup for Cerrone. The front kicks to the body that we called were there, like, all the time. He was just he kicked far more than Cerrone did.
Yeah, I think that had a lot to do with his success here. Like, I want to credit Ferguson for not just doing the crazy bite down, and it wasn't the way he pressured Edson Barboza, what he did in this fight. It was a lot more positional. It was a lot more putting pressure on with footwork and then reaching out to touch Cerrone to sort of get Cerrone exchanging, part of how maybe he coaxed him into that boxing match. But a big part of how he was able to keep the pressure on from a longer range was with those kicks. He did a really good job of backing Cerrone up and just constantly presenting a threat even when he was out of range. So, like, I feel like Cerrone was basically just convinced that he had to plant his feet and counter with punches. That's why he started boxing with Ferguson so much. He had to catch him overextending or something. He just didn't have there were no safe zones whatsoever for Cerrone in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think there were some early, because he could force Ferguson back early. But then, because Ferguson just didn't have the defense, he even being as insane as he is, if Cerrone's just landing clean punches on him when he comes forward, he's still going to back up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just the fact that he's always been a bit like that. I don't think it's ever going to go away, really. It's like the first Diaz fight. They get out and they start trading hands, and rather than Cerrone doing the thing of, like, oh, I'm trading hands, I'd better follow it up with kicks. This guy is typically horrendous at dealing with kicks. He just ended up getting sucked into that boxing match.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only when he can start to dictate a bit with his hands that he feels happy enough to start letting the kicks go.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like, amazing performance from Ferguson. Again, I'm just shocked at how good his defense was in that second round.
Mm-hmm.
His ability to keep coming forward, and, like, he really didn't get hit with much significantly in that second round at all.
No, really by like the last minute of the first, I think he was kind of settled in. He's just got such a bizarre rhythm, and it almost hurts me to hear the defense called good, but it's effective. There's no denying that. But like leaning back with your chin really high should not be good defensive practice. Ferguson just has, once he gets out of that first round, a weird way of making it work, of seeing the punches coming, of constantly moving, of intercepting with his hands. And then, always being willing to stay. Like, it's part of why his willingness to stay in that range, despite the shakiness of his defense, is big. Because there were some significant moments in this fight where Cerrone hit him, even with some nice, clean offense, and just wasn't prepared for Ferguson to come back at him. Ferguson was always in range to counter and always willing to do so. So, great performance from Tony. I feel immeasurably bad that he felt bad at the end of this fight. I think he should feel happy. It was great. It's good to see him back. Give the man a goddamn title shot. Before we wrap up, one more fight that we can cover in our block of time here. Peter Yan and Jimmy Rivera. This was a great fight. This was a fantastic fight. the biggest thing I want to emphasize is that this was a great performance from Jimmy Rivera. I expected, we both expected him to pose some unique challenges to Jan. The fact that he had some defensive acumen, that he was a combination counter striker, that he possessed a jab. Like, these are some qualities we're thinking, he can find some flaws in Petr Yan's defense. He can find some openings in his aggressive combinations. But ultimately, I thought he's going to get tired. He is going to fight at a pace he can't maintain. He's going to get beaten up and likely finished late. And instead, he fought 3 of what may very well be the finest rounds he's fought in the UFC. He did a hell of a job of just consistently defending and sharply countering Petr Yan without wasting too much energy. And there were 2 moments in the fight where he allowed himself to get back up into the fence. And just to show you how good Petr Yan is, he got dropped both times. And those likely had a lot to do with the fact that Rivera lost this fight. But he had some really great moments and some prolonged periods of success against a really, really dangerous fighter in Petr Yan.
Yeah. So it wasn't really 3 rounds. It was kind of 2.8. But yeah, I thought he looked really good. And more than that, I think one thing we have to say about Rivera is that on most people's cards, including mine, he also won the 3rd round, which I never would have thought was going to happen. Like, if of all the outcomes, Jimmy Rivera winning the 3rd round and or losing a decision whilst doing so was not one of the ones I thought was going to happen.
He got better in general as the fight went on. The 2nd round was better for him than the 1st as well, except for the knockdown.
Yeah, and I think this did expose some problems with Petr Yan. I think it was both a great performance from Rivera and because I did have a worry about Petr Yan, is that I worried that he was one of these guys who might be inverse Tyron Woodley, in that he's very reliant on the fence. Like, he kind of needs to have people up there if he's going to do his best work. Mm-hmm. And Rivera's answer to that was not really to stay off the fence, because he spent actually long periods of the fight, even in the first and second rounds. He spent long periods on the fence. It was that he just did an amazing job of getting off it.
Yeah,
like he had a lot of different tricks that he was using to escape. It was very kind of Eddie Alvarez-esque. He would shift his weight one direction, go the other. He would attack into the clinch from one angle and then slip, duck out under the side on the other angle from where Yan was going, and then throw 2 punches and then be out and then go for a leg kick or something. He was never predictable with the direction that he was going in the way that guys like, say, Dodson were. So that Yan, who clearly has a knack for, figuring out which direction people are going in, managed to was really, really struggling to get his first strike to land on Rivera. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the time when that first strike did come in, it was combination counters coming back from Rivera, and he was like, where do I, because he's used to 1 or 2 punches coming back at him, but it was with Rivera, it was often 3 or 4, and he was like, okay, I'm going to default to the double forearm guard, and I'm going to catch and pitch when this combination's done. And the combination was done, and Rivera was gone.
Yep. And a lot of times when he was trying to catch and pitch, Rivera was doing something we talked about. He was finding the openings in that one-size-fits-all defense of Jan's. He got Yan ducking, and he caught him with some uppercuts. He caught him with a lot of right hooks around the side. He also did a great job of hitting the body. But I think you're right. Rivera's ability to get off the fence, something that Marlon Moraes probably could have used, was some of this footwork. He had a lot of methods. Sometimes he just fought his way off. He just waited for a counter and punched back. But a lot of the time, it seemed to me, he was finding his way off the fence. Something, that feels counterintuitive, but it is technical, fundamental footwork we should see a lot more of in MMA. He would, move in to Petr Yan.
Yeah.
Sometimes he clinched, which that was something that Marlon Moraes couldn't do in the main event. But a lot of other times he would sort of just take a diagonal step. He would time the first shot and then just sort of slide, just sidestep forward, basically. Not sidestep along the fence, but sidestep past Pirion as he's planting his feet to throw. And it was beautiful. Like, it was really good footwork. It was just about staying calm and timing. And he also mixed in, a couple of the reactive shots as well, which, Jan did a phenomenal job avoiding. But I thought he did a fantastic job of neutralizing Jan's offense while finding ways to get his own offense working. Any idea how he managed to pick up as the fight went on? Was it merely that Jan was not actually capable of adjusting, or did Rivera show some improved stamina here, do you think?
Oh yeah, I definitely think that was the best endurance that he's shown, especially considering
the two knockdowns.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that makes it, for me, it's a really tragic performance from him, because I thought he was honestly the better fighter. And it was, he's a guy who's slowed down multiple times in the UFC. He slowed down against Munoz, he slowed down against Almeida, and he's been on the receiving end of two incredibly dispiriting losses running up to this. John Dodson fight in between them, but, knocked out by Marlon Moraes and then just dominated by Sterling. Every reason to assume that he was going to be mentally crushed. But he really, just... Instead of fading away in the third round, he looked the best that he kind of ever has in the third round in the UFC, with the possible exception of that Dodson fight, who is someone who fights at no kind of pace at all.
I mean, that more than anything makes you think that Jimmy might have some more to show, because that is the one thing that I want to see out of counterpunchers in particular, is that ability to get hit, to get hurt, to have the fight slip away from you, and for your focus to intensify. You to just sort of lock into a groove. That was always something Juan Manuel Marquez had that stood out to me. Was, he was a maniac who would fight back, and people talked about that, but not just for that reason. He became more dangerous when you had knocked him down, because he would just lock in, and it would suddenly, the emotions would go away, and he would sort of shut down emotionally. Maybe not a great response for your personal life, but in a fight, to be able to shut down emotionally and just to be coldly reactive, that's how Jimmy Rivera looked in this fight. Jan is a fighter who always builds on people. He had two huge moments of success, both of which had the opposite effect on the momentum of the fight. I agree. Tragic is the word for it, because I feel pretty gutted for Jimmy Rivera, because maybe now he is dispirited, and what a terrible time for it, because I agree. He looked like the better fighter here. He looked like, if there's such a thing as deserve, it looked like he deserved to win.
Yeah, I mean, the Jan's solution was simultaneously clever, but also, low percentage. The solutions that he came with was somewhat desperate. In those 2 rounds, he basically came to the idea that he had to force Rivera in one direction and then counter, right? So he would come in and he would fake out a right hand by stepping forward onto his right foot, and then he would throw a skipping strike from his left side, a big wide skipping strike to catch Rivera as Rivera slipped out the other way. And both times it happened to work. But so in the first case, it was a big left hook, and in the second, it was that Dodson Horiguchi-esque skipping left kick, right? And in both cases, it happened to work. But in both of those cases, if someone does something different to what you're completely reading that they're going to do, they're just going to kill you. They are huge, long, reaching strikes that have to be perfect reads, and that's not necessarily something you can rely on to win fights in that way, because if Rivera had just thrown a left hook at the same time, he would have absolutely clattered Jan.
Yeah.
It's a good singular read, but I think, when we talk about process in these fights. You want to avoid having to make big singular dangerous reads like that as much as you feasibly can. So it's credit to Jan for being able to do it, but it was also like it showed how desperate that fight was for him, that he had to do that.
It showed some gaps, that another fighter could absolutely exploit. Although honestly, like seeing what Jimmy Rivera did in this fight, there aren't a ton of other guys who can fight that way in this division. There aren't a ton of like defensively slick, combination punching counter punchers who are comfortable letting someone like Jan initiate again and again and just continually, without pause, without time to think, repeatedly come up with new ways of answering those exchanges in time like that.
I mean, having seen Marlon Moraes against Henry Cejudo, would you be comfortable in predicting that Moraes could do that?
No.
Because I am now very much not.
It would break Moraes. And the fact that it didn't break Rivera is like, I just want to see more counterpunchers win, okay? And I like Jimmy Rivera. But yeah, it was a great fight. I mean, Jan, it's not like Jan disappointed. It just showed some gaps. It was really just that Rivera impressed, and it just feels disappointing that it wasn't enough to get the win. But Jan definitely did what he had to win. He sold out in the big moments when it really mattered. Like, these are also characteristics you look for in a fighter who is going places. So it was maybe a fight that suggested more about Jan's potential than Rivera's, but it also really showed Rivera's, showed Rivera's class, basically. It showed his skills and his ability, his smarts as a fighter. And I appreciated that. I really enjoyed that. That's about all the time we have for UFC 238, folks, on this main episode. But as I've said several times already, if you want to hear more about the card, we are going to do our best to cover, well, let's see, Tatiana Suarez versus Nina Ansaroff, Aljamain Sterling versus Pedro Munoz, Alexa Grasso versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz, and Calvin Kattar versus Ricardo Lamas, and possibly more besides on a bonus episode, which will come out sometime midweek on the Heavy Hands Patreon. So keep your eyes peeled for that. You will probably get, if you are subscribed to the Heavy Hands podcast feed, you will likely get a bonus episode teaser that will alert you of that, so that you don't have to keep your eyes peeled to the Patreon. But you can also just check out the Heavy Hands Patreon, and $3 a month is all you need to get access to those bonus episodes and all the other stupid shit we have on there. Before we wrap up, Phil, anything coming out this week?
Not that I can think of, but I am now tempted to write an article on the tragic ballad of Jimmy Rivera.
Do you want to write one together? Because I want to write about Rivera Jan too.
Maybe, yeah.
Oh, he doesn't want to, folks. Did you hear that tone in his voice?
No, I'm just thinking about how lazy. That's the thing. I'm just thinking about how lazy I am, rather than. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, could be fun. I can send you some ideas today. Great, folks. You are seeing how the sausage gets made.
Yeah, the quicksilver excitement of idea to reality.
Just imagine all of your favorite articles all began with some phrase like, yeah, all right.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm lazy, but I'll try.
Fine. Okay, well, keep your eyes peeled for that then on bloodyelbow.com. And otherwise, if you want to share your excitement for that upcoming article, which may or may not see the light of day, time will still tell, then you could probably do that on social media. Twitter.com is where you'll find both of us. For more fantastic tweets like the one I read at the top of the show, you should follow Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. And myself, I can be found at Boxing Bush with a B-U-S-C-H. And until next week, thank you all so much for listening. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.